This is the pathway of how this is happening. And it's not necessarily that hospitals are doing anything, wrong. Bacteria is just everywhere and incredibly clever.
Hi, I'm Belden Menkus, founder of Menkus & Associates, the strategy firm for businesses with a broader purpose. Welcome to The Purposeful Strategist, a podcast about how business leaders are bringing their organization's purpose and strategy to life. My guest today is Dr. Georgia Fleet, CEO and co-founder of Zonova, a medtech company working to prevent infections associated with medical devices and hospitalization. She founded Zonova in 2023 with the aim of bringing affordable, scalable, and effective antimicrobial technology to market. Now they're pursuing a licensing business model selling to device manufacturers, joining the fight against healthcare-acquired infection and antimicrobial resistance. Georgia, welcome to The Purposeful Strategist.
Thank you so much. It's really great to be here, and I'm really excited for this conversation.
Oh, likewise. So Zonova is all about preventing hospital-acquired infections. And I and maybe a lot of people think, hospitals are basically sterile places. So what's going on here? How do these infections happen? What's the problem?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a really great question. And it's one that's come up a lot, particularly when we've been doing, investment rounds. And, it's completely correct. Hospitals, they put so much effort and work into keeping everything as sterile and clean as possible. And even, down to the devices themselves, like medical devices that are used in, the process of, giving healthcare. They are sterile in the pack, but as soon as you open them, they are no longer sterile. And so where a really large portion of these hospital-acquired infections are originating from are on medical devices or associated with medical devices. And so when I say medical devices, what I mean is, kind of all the plastic tubing that's delivering healthcare. So, most commonly, sort of like an IV line, as an example, or central line, or PICCs and ports, or ventilator tubing, et cetera, and so on. And so what's happening is that once they're in the body, they're no longer sterile out of the pack, and bacteria is everywhere. Bacteria is living on your skin, for example. So, what happens is that bacteria loves to grow on surfaces, and it just so happens that these medical device surfaces are, the perfect entrance into the body. So using the example of, an IV or a cannula, bacteria grows on the surface of that. It's then got direct access to the bloodstream. You then might end up with a bloodstream infection, that could potentially lead to sepsis and so on. And so this is how, this is the pathway of how this is happening. And it's not necessarily that hospitals are doing anything, wrong. Bacteria is just everywhere and incredibly clever.
In the medical world, this isn't a new problem. Maybe I'm just belatedly figuring it out, but it's not a new problem. So what do people do now? Because what I'm trying to set that out as a baseline to then understand, what is Zonova aiming to do or doing that's different?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the current standard is obviously we are incredibly reliant on antibiotics. If you're in critical care and maybe you get an infection, and antibiotics, will often be one of the very first things that people reach for. And what we're finding is with the antimicrobial resistance crisis is that these antibiotics are becoming less and less effective. We have less and less options. And so, infection control and infection prevention technologies become even more important. People have developed antimicrobial devices before. Particularly, this seems to be concentrated around wound care and also urinary catheters. Whether or not that's an antibiotic eluting system or a silver-based coating, but for one reason or another, these things are not working as they should, or just don't last long enough. Or, if we're using antibiotics, of course, that then has the same problems coming up with resistance.
Mm-hmm. So where does Zonova fit in then? What are you trying to do?
Yeah. So where we're coming in is we really wanted to focus on building in that infection control where it matters. So on the devices that these, bacteria are using to start these infections. And so what we've ended up developing is an antimicrobial additive that can be embedded into the manufacturing process. Not another silver coating. If you take away one thing from this, that's the one to take away.
Okay, it's not a silver coating.
not a silver coating. It's kind of like the first thing that everybody asks. Like, oh, so it's probably a silver, something, right? Like, no, not silver. But yeah, it's an antimicrobial additive, like powder that we drop into the manufacturing process.
Hmm.
And the reason that we've done that is number one, coatings. It's an extra process on the end of the manufacturing line. That's additional costs, additional paperwork, potentially additional regulatory, testing that's required as well. So, for us, it was really important to embed it directly into the manufacturing process so that you don't have this additional step on the end, protect the manufacturer's margins. And also from the perspective of scale as well, our view is that would be significantly easier to scale than an additional coating process. So yeah, that's what we're doing. And what you end up with is a medical device such as an IV or a cannula that behaves exactly the same, but it is actively fighting off bacteria on the surface of the device. And so you then don't get the infection.
So if I've got it right, your background is more in materials, you rather than medicine exactly. So tell us both, if you don't mind, the kind of what must be somewhat intertwined story of you and Zonova. What led you to set it up as a business? What else might you have been doing? How'd you end up, how'd you end up here?
Yeah, no, great. Yeah, no, absolutely. So my undergrad was actually in like pharmaceutical and chemical sciences, so kind of like how to make drugs and drug formulation.
Hmm.
I have always been very driven by kind of like healthcare and impact. But I think for me, once I kind of got into it and understood how long drugs take to develop and all of the hurdles that they face, and that, you could work on something maybe for 10 years and then maybe it fails a trial and then that's it. I just thought, okay, I don't have the stomach or to do that.
Yeah.
You know, Kudos and thank you to everybody that is. It's super important. But for me, I think I needed something a little bit more fast paced. And so
Hmm.
I ended up working in a medical device company called BTG Biocompatibles for just over a year. And I loved it. Medical devices, much shorter path to market. They're so incredibly important to healthcare, still has that great impact. But yeah, it's a lot more fast paced. And so I thought, great, medical devices is a
Hmm.
really, I think this is a really interesting area. And then I actually had no intention to. So that was I took a year out in my undergrad. So between my second and third year, that's what I did. And I had no intention to go back into academia. I wanted to go into industry, really, make an impact in the real world.
Hmm.
Long story short, didn't end up doing that. Ended up doing a doctorate at UCL, and yeah, got really just obsessed with hospital-acquired infections. It was in a literature review. I wasn't actually supposed to be doing what I ended up doing, but did a literature review, stumbled upon hospital-acquired infections, and yeah, thought, okay, why is nobody seemingly doing anything about this? And for the ones that it really matters, so the big problematic ones are ventilator-associated pneumonia, which is bacteria growing on the endotracheal tube, end up with the pneumonia, and the other big one, bloodstream infections that you might get from IV lines or cannulas. And so for me, that then became my focus. But yeah, I think what led me to start Zonova instead of kind of following that path and maybe joining another company was that I'd worked on this in my PhD specifically for ventilator associated pneumonia due to the mortality rates that you see with that. And I didn't in my PhD, what I developed was not commercially viable. It was, really expensive, really unstable. Like it would never be able to scale and, make it into the real world. So I thought, the mission is still very much the same. But after finishing up my doctorate, I had this like now or never feeling. And I thought, right,
Hmm.
nobody seems to be doing anything that's working. I think if I'm going to do it, it has to be now. And so I took the risk. I started Zonova after finishing my doctorate. And for the first year and a half, I was bootstrapping, working a few different part-time jobs until we managed to get to, reach our first milestone, which then allowed us to close our first raise and so on. So yeah, it was more of a, very much impact driven. And I think I've always had a little bit of an entrepreneurial streak
Hmm.
in me. It's definitely something that's always interested me. And actually now looking back, I can say that I'm a much better fit to this role than I ever was to being a scientist.
So there's a little bit of a mystery in there, and I understand there's maybe parts of this you can't talk about because of sort of protecting your intellectual property and everything. But if you can, I've got it. You're doing a PhD, you were working on something, you realized this isn't going to be commercially viable. You made a leap, and now so. I assume you've got something you think is commercially viable. Tell me, like fill in if you can that sort of bubble there of what happened to get you from, I'm working on a PhD with something that isn't viable. I really, really want to do this. And now I've raised some money. I've told some people we can do this. So what happened in the middle there?
Yeah, so we actually had the first proof of concept and the first patent filing before we raised our first round.
Hmm.
So I was doing a lot of kind of dodgy experiments in my spare bedroom, really relying on my network to get, the testing done and work with what we had. And we began speaking to investors, and one of the things that we needed to do before closing that pre-seed round was to file the first patent. So, I think, and we've had this conversation recently actually about, in the context of lab space and what do you actually need. And I think because in my mind it had to be scalable and affordable, it couldn't involve any high tech equipment anyway. And
Hmm.
so we worked really hard. For that first year and a half, whilst we were bootstrapping, to try some different things, see what stuck, see if anything worked. And fortunately enough for us, something worked. And so that was the basis. We got the proof of concept that was successful, and that's what we filed our first patent on back in 2024.
And so for the uninitiated, how do you prove it's working? Because you surely aren't going out and sort of sticking it in people,
No,
seeing whether
no.
they get infected or not.
So there are, for us, there's an ISO standard, for example, for testing antibacterial or antimicrobial properties of plastic. And so we did a test that was very similar to that. So, we made a very crude, rough sample. We then tested that for its antimicrobial properties. That was a success, and that's what we filed that first patent on.
Hmm. I want to come back to patents in a minute, but let's just, I just kind of want to make sure I've got a sense of the purpose there. I mean, obviously it's got something to do with infections and healthcare, but if you had to describe it, what would you say it was?
I think the purpose of Zonova is really that you shouldn't go into hospital and get more ill, or,
Hmm.
you shouldn't be going in for chemotherapy or, a dialysis, and, you have to stop your treatment because you get an infection. Or
Right.
medical devices are so important. They are core infrastructure to healthcare. We need them. There's no two ways about it. But in our view, they really shouldn't be playing a part in the onset of infection if we can avoid it. And so that's really what we're all about.
One of the things I've observed talking to people about their own organization's purpose is a phenomenon I sometimes describe as purpose grows. So you're thinking medical devices, and when I hear medical device, I always think of something on a rack somewhere that's beeping. But you're talking about like the tubes and the
Yes.
wires.
Yeah, more like
So
the consumables, I suppose.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So can you imagine a day when your purpose gets beyond that? And if so, if all of a sudden whatever you've got becomes sort of the standard, everybody who has anything put in them in the way of a medical device, it's got your stuff. Where next? What's beyond that? Or is it like, I don't know, we got to climb this mountain first?
I mean, very much climbing mountain number one first. That would be the end goal. Dream for
Hmm.
us is that every device where it matters that is associated with infection has this level of infection control built into it. So that's definitely mountain number one. We've had interest from all over. I think one of the potential mistakes, for example, that has been made with silver is that it is just everywhere. And maybe that has played a part in why maybe it's not working so well, or, only using technology where we absolutely need it is something that I am quite passionate about. And so medical devices is absolutely cause number one. Another interesting space, what people have mentioned to us is space. Anything that happens on Earth apparently also has to happen in space, but it's an area that I know
Hmm.
absolutely nothing about. There potentially could be defense applications as well. So yeah, there's, we've had everything from space, defense,
Hmm.
children's toys, cosmetics. I'm quite keen to focus on where it truly, truly matters.
And what's the Zonova strategy? Where do you want to get to in the next few years?
Yeah, so we have just closed our seed round, so very much all
Hmm.
about commercialization now. So as you mentioned in the intro, we're a B2B licensing business, so we are actively working with partners to bring our tech to market. So much goes into medical device design. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. Clinicians know and love, products that they use. And so, for us in terms of impact and, ease of users switching over to an antimicrobial version, we want to work with these companies that are already in hospitals, that already have their distribution set up, just to provide this antimicrobial add-on.
You and I had a chat here a couple of weeks ago, and I think you said at the time that you'd been through at least one pivot, pretty normal for a startup, I think. Can you tell us anything about that, or is it sort of, oh, that's ancient history, it doesn't matter?
No, yeah, I mean, we've definitely been through a few pivots, but I think, the biggest one was we started off thinking that we were going to manufacture this. I feel like that's just maybe like the normal thing that you think
Sure.
you're going to do it all, and you're going to do it all by yourself, and it's going to be great. But actually, it was around the time we closed our pre-seed round that we came to the conclusion that actually to reach the scale and impact that we want, licensing is absolutely the way to go, and working with device manufacturers that are already experts in this. And even from the point of, regulatory approvals, there's data to show that I think there's some sort of like, side by side, if you're going through a regulatory approval as a startup, it's going to take you significantly longer than it is for like a larger company. It's almost like a startup tax for getting through regulatory approvals. And so
Right.
it just makes sense for the scale and impact that we want to have pivoted away from manufacturing, given that this can go into so many different devices,
Mm,
rather than us
mm,
having to kind of go at it slowly and chip away and do one device and the other one and then another one. This allows us to get to that scale a lot quicker.
mm-hmm. And if you can, that sounds like a pretty significant decision. We think we're going to do this. We're going to be out there. We're going to have manufacturing plants, and we're going to, we're going to be licensing this. How
Yeah.
did that come about? Who made that decision? Why did they even think, oh, we got to change tack here? How'd that all, take us into the room?
Yeah, it was definitely led by me and feedback that we were getting. I think, especially when you are fundraising, the easiest or
Mm,
best path to reach scale and impact is often something that comes up. Medical devices and medtech is such a difficult area to go into anyway. When you're adding on then manufacturing, etc., I think it was a much easier pill to swallow when you say, look, it's de-risked a little bit. We can talk to multiple different manufacturers, and then we just become an IP licensing business model. It's almost a little bit like there's a company called Arm. It's like a chip company, and they're like
yeah, yeah.
purely licensing. Yeah. So the way that I've been kind of describing it now is that we're just like a medtech version of that. I think it was more of like a slower process. We were getting feedback consistently that was telling us that maybe we didn't have the right business model. We then made the decision to switch. And yeah, of course, it's definitely changed the way that the business looks and feels. You need different expertise, obviously different budget, different fundraising strategy. But I think one of the biggest benefits of this as well is that not manufacturing it ourselves allows us to generate revenue much earlier. The
Mm,
opportunity
mm.
brings it forward, by a couple of years. So yeah, that's a huge priority for us as an early stage startup as well.
We've talked, or at least you've touched on patents and all the rest of that. Take us through, if you can, sort of what that looks like. What sort of obstacle course is that? How many hurdles do you have to jump over? Where are you in all of that? What's all that look like?
Caveat this with I'm obviously not a lawyer, so,
Mhm. That's
so
fine.
take
I'm
everything
not
with a pinch of
either.
salt. So from our perspective, we've got 5 patents that are pending, and though the intellectual property is entirely owned by Zonova, so that's really important to us as well. That we're not having to license from somebody else and then paying additional royalties and so on.
Mhm.
So the intellectual property all sits within Zonova. Really, it's a case of, have you invented something novel? We then have a conversation with our lawyers about that. If it's looking great, we'll then file an initial US provisional. And then you've got the international phase, the PCT phase, that then comes a year later. And then after that, you've then got the regional phase. So we're just coming up to one of our first regional phase decisions at the moment. And all the others are kind of tracking through that patent application process, which anybody that's gone through it will know that it's a really, really long process.
And are you in a position to actually do deals, licensing deals with equipment manufacturers, device manufacturers, before you have the patents? Or is it sort of, well, you can see if they might be interested, but since you can't tell them how it actually works, they can't, how far can you go before you get past that hurdle?
Once we've got an NDA in place, we can, very much tell them what we're doing and how it
Right.
works. And so that then at the moment is forming the base of us discussing potential co-development deals with partners, and those would be paid, and then moving on to licensing agreements based off of the success of those. So we can very much still be active in the space, and, be working with those device manufacturers early on.
When you look at it, the device manufacturers, is it sort of, it's a really consolidated industry? There's 3 or 4 people you talk to, or is it, no, there's that when you go into a hospital, there's like 20 different brand names that might be used for the same device. If somebody puts a cannula in you, and it could have a whole bunch of different brand names on it. Or is it?
Yeah, you've definitely got the big, you've definitely got the big ones, and obviously they've got a lot more of the market share. But there are other smaller device manufacturers as well, and we're talking to everybody at the moment.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's not a case of there's four people we can go to or four companies
Right,
that we can go
right.
to and that's it. Yeah, there are really awesome smaller companies and also a lot of small medical device startup companies as well. So there's a lot going on at the moment in terms of innovation in the medical device space.
And if you don't mind, I'd just love to get a picture of sort of in the real world, what does a startup look like these days? Because so many things are hybrid, so many things are virtual. If I've
Mm.
got it right, you have or soon will have 7 employees. So where are they all in the same place? Do you all, you're all
Yeah.
huddled together eating pizza late at night, or is it no, one's in Spain, one's
No, that's a really good question. So for us, the bulk of our team is based in a lab. And so for me, it was really important that the rest of us were not remote so that we can build that team culture. That's something that I'm really conscious of. And also so that, nobody gets resentful. I worked in places before where it's, you need to be in a lab, but then everybody else is from home. And I think COVID really exasperated that. There have been times where you're trying to have a conversation over Slack and it's just not hitting.
Mm,
And it's like, right, let's just talk about this in person. For me, it seems to work much better, particularly because we've got lab and not everybody can be remote. If everybody can
mm,
be remote, then it feels maybe a little bit more fair and flexible. But so yeah, that's the way that we're running our company, and that's played into the type of space that we have, so that we can have everybody together in one room. But we do have two fractional team members as well that are remote, and so we've got support from a fractional CCO, and we've also got support from a fractional CFO who obviously are
mhm,
not needed in the business as
sure.
full-time employees at this point.
And where's the lab?
We're based in Ealing.
Okay, and why there?
A big driver for me was having the flexibility to build the space that we need and want as we grow, and also affordability.
And I associate that. So this is maybe good, particularly for people who are not anywhere near London, maybe going to get a little micro. But I sort of associate that part of London with, kind of that imperial campus that's around Hammersmith, and then you're saying you're sort of kind of west of there. Is there a growing sort of med tech corridor that I'm unaware of out that way, or are you just like you're like the little
No, we're kind of
bacteria
out
that
in Ealing.
landed?
Yeah. We're so the reason that I knew about this place was because I worked part-time for a startup in that phase of bootstrapping Zonova, and they were based here. I was like, this is, it's not pretty, but
Yeah.
it's great, it works. And there was another company here, and they scaled all the way up to, I think, Series A or B here. They had like 30 odd employees, I think, at some
Hmm.
point go through here, and they just kind of kept on taking over unit. It made a lot of sense for us, and it was particularly in terms of like the way that we wanted to run the company, because the other options probably would have been rent a bench in a shared lab. And then,
Right.
you're not really able to kind of like,
Yeah, you couldn't huddle everybody around and talk freely if you've
yeah,
got a shared bench. Yeah,
exactly.
I get
Yeah.
that.
But yeah, we're not too far away from that hub. So the kind of like White City area, but we
Yeah.
are a few stops down on the tube line from there.
And do you imagine you'll stay there, till you get to kind of, Series C, 30 or so people, or is it you might stay longer? You're already thinking about, well, we're kind of outgrowing this.
This most recent space we took on in January, and we took it on a little bit earlier with the idea that we would need space to grow.
Right.
So I think it's really a case of assessing when the time is right. If, for example, this time next year it's no longer working for us, we'd make that decision. Then. It's something that I am very aware of. I think right now it's absolutely working for us.
A couple of other things I wouldn't mind kind of probing. I realize we've sort of gotten into the
Yeah,
microgeography of London and all the rest of
yeah.
that. But do you see Zonova as part of sort of a med tech, ecosystem that you're talking to other people who are running med tech businesses and,
Mhm.
or is it like, nah, not really. We're kind of doing our thing. We have a plan. We know who we need to talk to. We're talking to some lawyers about the patent stuff, and we're
Yeah.
it's great. People are doing things, but we don't actually need to deal with them.
Oh, no, that's definitely not the case. So we were successful in getting into the medtech innovator program. It's a US-based program,
Hmm.
and the community is worldwide. It's based in the US, but there are companies in the program from all over the world. The community that they have built and the support that they have built is absolutely incredible. It's really opened quite a few doors for us as well with those,
Hmm.
medical device manufacturers and, really understanding how they think and operate and, in terms of our regulatory strategy as well and what we need to
Mm-hmm.
provide for the manufacturers and testing. Yeah. So we're definitely a part of, medtech, communities.
And when you think about Zonova, are you looking to stay independent and conquer the world of antimicrobials? Or if somebody came along in the not too distant future and said, we'd just like to give you a big wad of cash for this, you'd go, great, job done. What next?
We obviously have an exit, strategy in mind that maybe is a platform carve out acquisition style. So yeah, it's definitely on our radar. Ultimately, the reality of investment is that our investors need a return on that investment at some
Hmm.
point. We very much have an exit strategy in mind. And for us, it will be about building up the most value that we possibly can. And when it's no longer right for us to take that forward, that would be the right time.
As you've been on this journey, what's changed most in sort of how you lead and what you do as Zonova's grown? Because at one point it was sort of you part-time is the sense I get. Now it's a growing number of full-time people, advisors, et cetera. How have you had to shift what you do?
Yeah, I think I'm very much in the middle of that shift at the moment. I haven't ever had any kind of formal management or leadership training, so
Hmm.
I'm very much actively learning and taking that on now that I'm managing and leading a much larger team because I've been working on my own for so long. Your doctorate, it's on your own. I think I sometimes my mind is over here and I've just forgotten to tell everybody else that, oh no, we're
Yes.
doing
Yeah,
this
yeah.
now. And so yeah, being very aware that I need to communicate much more clearly and more often, probably in terms of what we're thinking, and trying to put in processes around that as well. Getting the foundations right so that as we grow and scale, we're in a really good place to do that.
Have you, as a group, spent much time talking about how we manage ourselves, how we behave with each other? A lot of corporates spend a lot of time obsessing about stuff like that. I'm just wondering, is it sort of, no, we're just kind of dealing with it in the moment? Or no, actually, every quarter, every month, every whatever, we step back and explore that sort of stuff?
Yeah, so we're definitely not a big corporate.
No, definitely not.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I'm focused on myself and what I can do and control and learn and change and be better as a leader. Maybe that will come in time for the rest of the team. I have absolutely no
Hmm.
idea, but at the moment, I think the culture very much what I've heard is anyway from other people that have been there and done that is that the culture is very much coming from you directly as the founders and how you're operating. And so
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think that's the first thing that I'm tackling and that we're working on culture that way.
Sounds sensible. You and I met through Sarah Turner at Angel Academy.
Yes.
And just curious where that's fit into your journey so far. And do you sort of feel we're kind of past that? That was great, recommend to everybody, but we're sort of past that. Or it's like, no, that's still part of how we're driving ourselves forward.
No, yeah, very, very active with Angel Academy. I was actually at an event with them last night
Hmm.
for the opening of their EIS Fund number two.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah, we've been involved with Angel Academy, I would say, right from the beginning, and they've been super, super supportive. We've been through a few times. The first time that, well, we're going first time that I contacted them back in 2023, it was a phone call and it was, don't too early. Then tried again in 2024 and got through to the screening call. And actually, some of the people on the screening call liked it enough to take it forward and, met up with them separately. And that formed the basis really of our pre-seed round. But it didn't go
Hmm.
through the full process. And then, once we got to know everybody a little bit better and the company had matured, we then came back again. And so Angel Academy, we had two different closes for this last seed round. Angel Academy led the first part of that equity close. And then Thena
Hmm.
Capital led the second part of that as well. Very much still involved with Angel Academy. And we've got Angel Academy members that sit on our board and that advise us. And so, yeah, very much still a part of it.
Still a big part of what you're doing.
Yes.
Georgia, one of the things I've picked up from a number of things you said is at one level you might think, well, yes, of course, I would have gotten here if I wasn't. But you're really willing to give it another go and then give it another go. So you go talk to Angel Academy. No, not yet. Come back later. 3 times for this, accelerator. It just sounds to me like that's a big part of your success formula. Do you see yourself that way?
I think if anything, it's probably the biggest thing. I think you have to just keep going. And I think a big part of that is, obviously taking on the feedback and actioning it. And sometimes it's just a case of, it's not the right time or fit for whatever reason. And being able to distinguish when it truly is not going to ever go anywhere or whether or not it's worth another go as well is something quite important. But yeah, I do think that kind of like perseverance and persistence, especially if something big has happened or if you've changed something, is probably one of the biggest reasons that we've made it to where we are.
So kind of a try, learn, try again.
Yeah. Just keep going. Yeah. Because, I think a lot of the time as well, it's just like, there are so many different reasons that people could say no to you for whatever opportunity. A lot of them probably aren't anything to do with you or your company as well.
Yeah.
So it's definitely not easy, but just keep on going. And I think, for that, for the MedTech Innovator Program, we were not the only company that had applied quite a few times. And
sure,
it was right. If we were there this time last year, it wouldn't have been the right time for us. So yeah, all very much happened the way that I think it was meant to.
Very good. Well, for me, it's been definitely an education, been really inspiring. I'll look forward to hearing how things go. It's probably too early for you to tell me this because you may not know yourself. But if I were to end up in hospital and somebody was to put a device in me, how would I know it was one of yours?
Ours is blue.
Yours is blue.
Ours is blue. Yeah, we've gone for blue. And yeah, we're calling it ZROS technology.
Very good. Yeah. Does that mean anything to the initiated?
Yeah, so Z for Zonova, and then the ROS part is the way that our tech works is it generates these species called reactive oxygen species. So
that sounds like a whole nother episode.
I was going to say, yeah, I don't think we want to get into that in the last minute.
I'd love to do at some point, but maybe not now.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's been great. Anything before we wrap up? Anything else you'd like to share with listeners?
Oh gosh, no, I think we've covered a lot today, actually. I think that if the 2 things that we're going to take away is, number 1, Zonova is not another silver coating. Number 2, perseverance.
Perseverance, very good. Yeah. 2 good messages. One almost right at the beginning. It's not silver.
Yeah. Just in case in the last 45 minutes it's been forgotten, not another silver coating.
Not silver. Not silver. Very good. If I remember nothing else, and I'm sure I remember more than that, it's not silver. It's blue.
Yeah, blue, not silver.
Very good. Well, again, thanks so much for joining us.
No, it's really real pleasure. Thank you so much.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. Before you go, just a quick word about the work we do at Menkus & Associates. The standard strategy toolkit is inadequate for businesses with a broader purpose. I work with boards and exec teams to help them get clear on their situation, aligned about who they are, and committed to what they're going to do about it. The result? Better performance overall. Thanks again, and join us soon for the next episode of The Purposeful Strategist.